Hi and welcome back to Bike Speed. So this week we're going to sort out this Giant Defy. This one we're going to do a full hub rebuild and bearings on the free hub and bearings on the wheel. These are Giant PR2 wheels. We're going to do the rear derailleur cable. We're going to service this bike. We're going to do some subtle detailing that just makes all the difference to a way a bike like this presents. So you can see here, this was the initial reason the bike came in. There was a lot of play in this free hub here. The cassette was moving quite significantly there, you could see that. While I was noticing that with the customer with me, I noticed this breaking up of this rear derailleur cable. That's a failure waiting to happen. It's only a matter of time, so that needs addressing. But good news was that the chain wasn't stretched at all. You can see here the chain gauge that we use wasn't dropping into that chain at all, so this has had a new chain at some point. Now, this bike was a credit to the customer really. It was in immaculate condition. We're talking about subtleties with our servicing here and what a difference we're going to make to it. So even though the bike was in great condition, we treat all bikes the same in that when we're servicing them, we remove the mechanical parts, we assess those, we weigh up which ones we're going to in-depth clean and which ones we're not. But typically the derailleurs we put through the ultrasonic cleaner anyway because it gets so in-depth. At ultrasonic wave level, the agitation of the debris that's tucked in that you cannot get to with a rag or a brush, it just makes the world of difference to the components. So that's what we're going to do. This front derailleur looks clean, and yet when you look deep in at all the pivot points, you can see the little bits of debris on those. We're going to clean those right out. We're also going to take off the chain set. That wasn't too bad, that just needed a wash down. Including brake pads and the discs, we're going to completely clean up those discs. Got a little bit before and after for the disc, which you'll see as we're doing this. And again, it's amazing what a difference we can make. Now, when I've got an internal routing like this, I'll use a little bit of cable guiding to make sure that I leave a guide inside the frame, because there's nothing worse than getting that out and taking it right out the frame and then having a job getting your new cable in because you haven't put little guides in to help yourself with your cable as it goes in. So that's what I was doing there. Now everything goes through the ultrasonic cleaner. So we let everything run there for a little bit of time. Now we rinse them off and wash them off. You can see I'm doing here the cassette, but I'll do that with all the parts that we've gone through the ultrasonic cleaner. We have a 6-litre ultrasonic cleaner. We use a water-soluble degreaser so it washes off like this afterwards, so there's no residues left on any of the parts that we've ultrasonic cleaned. And of course, always the chain we clean out like this so everything's right. So if you're new to the channel, do subscribe. We're thrilled with the way we're building the community on the channel now. You know, the comments we get, especially to like last week's Q&A, the way you all got involved with that, asking us the questions and then commenting and leaving little notes for us and everything. It's the enjoyment of YouTube is the way we interact with everyone. So do drop a comment as well, but do subscribe if you're new to the channel. So now we're just washing everything off, getting everything nice, and then we'll start the re-greasing and re-lubricating process of the mechanical parts that we've removed. So we do mechanics first, then we move on to other parts. Now with these jockey wheels, we actually used a brake cleaner on these because it's not as wet as a degreaser and it evaporates. These had their own bearings in the center, so we didn't want to put those through the ultrasonic cleaner, so the jockey wheels stayed out of the ultrasonic cleaning and we just cleaned those up before putting them back together. That way we don't affect the bearings that are in those. They were absolutely fine, they didn't need anything. So we're just lubricating now the pivot points and everything on the derailleur, regreasing the springs and so on, which is sort of our typical process of cleaning all these parts up just to make sure the longevity and everything is there. Including these axles, they're very prone to seasoning wheels because they're often not lubricated, so we just lubricated those as well. And now we're working on the brake pads themselves. We'll clean off the debris on those, then we'll just skim them off. That'll take any roughness off. You can see the difference between the before and afters. The ones at the top were in pretty good nick, but the ones at the bottom look like they've just come out of the packet. You know, it's amazing what a difference you can make just by cleaning those up and giving them a little skim. And now we're going to work on this rear hub. So you can see the movement here. What I'm doing there is assessing where that movement is, making sure it's not actually the wheel bearings themselves. I can tell from doing that it is the hub itself. That play was between the outer and the inner of the axle itself, so I knew that it was the free hub bearings in that instance that were actually the culprit of that movement. But also we replaced the bearings because they had to come out of the wheel and out of the hub in order to get that hub out. So we're knocking out the bearings here. I do those without any pressure on, on my hand, just a palm of my hand to tap them out. I always loosen off this lock ring for the free hub before I take it off the bike, just because the bike wheel itself will hold that as I do it. Then we take off the free hub. Then I release that lock ring, which is now only hand tight. Out come the old bearings. You'll see me now gradually take this apart and then Everything here, again, we'll go through the ultrasonic cleaner. Again, we clean all the parts off as we do with any other mechanical part. Wash them down, get all the ultrasonic degreaser off of the parts, make sure they're all dry and ready to go. And you'll see the greasing process of this hub and the way you put that back together. There's 4 greases, and talk you through that as well. Doing a free hub actually is one of my favourite jobs. So I'm just washing the wheel down, just checking all the spokes, making sure that hub is all okay before we go to putting the hub back together. So that's sort of what I'm doing there whenever I wash a wheel down, is actually checking everything. So we've got anti-seize grease on the threads. Then I'm going to use a clear silicone grease on the rubber seal that goes along there, just to stop that sticking as it's screwed back on. Then we're just going to use a little bit of Shimano hub grease on the pores of the hub itself. And then we're going to use the Shimano premium grease here on the bearing race itself before replacing all the bearings with new ones. So you can see there we've already got 3 greases involved, and then we're going to use a general purpose grease just to wipe around the lock nut and the sort of top race that goes inside here, just so that slides inside nicely, so that as I'm putting everything together, we're not going to get any of the bearings falling out of that grease and causing us a problem as we put it back together. So here comes our general purpose grease, the 4th grease in this process, before we then put it back together. Drop that in nicely, and on goes the lock ring. Put that back on the bike before using the lock ring tool. We just torque that up there before putting the lock ring tool back in. Again, like I say, it's easier to do that on the bike than off the bike because the wheel holds that itself. So everything's back there, and now that feels perfect with the correct amount of play. There's a little bit of movement in these, as there always is, because they've got spin and everything, but that's now perfect, so I'm more than happy with that. So in go new bearings now. We took out the old ones. They weren't too bad, but they just had that early sign of being worn like the hub bearings were, so it was time to replace those as well. Grease on everything just to make sure nothing sticks and corrodes. So in goes the axle, on go the preloaders for the bearings there. They're locked together just so you get that to feel right, and then lock that up, and I'm more than pleased with that. And then we just work on the disc now. We emery cloth that down first to take out all the grooves, as I've explained in other videos how that creates that record player sound and can make them squeal. And then we clean the center, and what a difference. Look at this, look. So that's before as you see it there. You can see the scores, you can see the marks, and this is it after. Looks like a new disc. So we clean up both sides, put that back on. We also do that to the front. So I've already done the front wheel. We did that off camera because we try to do one side of a bike view on camera, or one wheel. So that's what we done there. And then on goes the cassette. Before we torque that up, we torque all the bolts for the disc, and that wheel is now ready to roll and as good as it can now be. Next up, once we're happy we've done all the mechanical parts, we're just going to wash the frame down. This was a routine service, so we weren't detailing this, although the bike's immaculate, it didn't need detailing. So we wash it down, we microfiber towel all that moisture off just to make sure we really get that bike nice and clean before we start the rebuild process. First part of that rebuild process is the new cable. We use a super slick cable. It's a nice tightly wound stainless steel cable that has got a smoothness to it. When you run your fingers along it, they just feel lovely in comparison with most other cables. So we put one of those on, put all through the guides that I'd already put in, and that's all gone through nicely, and then we start the rebuild process of the components themselves. So on goes the chainring. Now I pinch tight everything when I first build a bike, so you can see I'm just using an Allen key, just pinch tight, just to make sure that we can adjust everything, get everything right, and then we'll go through the bike with a torque wrench afterwards. So we're just putting this end on here. I actually shortened that cable. It was actually too long, so although it lost its end, it was also too long as well. So that's the subtlety of a service that can make the world of difference to a bike. Just the way it operates, the way it performs. You'll notice when I'm doing the rear derailleur adjustments that I had to adjust the B screw. Again, that's something that was already adjusted wrong. But anyway, that's for future on in the video. So now we just do the pads. I just put a little bit of copper slip on the back of those pads just to stop the pistons creating a rust ring on the pads, which again can create squealing further down the wear of the bike. If it gets wet, then it just stops that. On goes the chain. Now you'll notice here that once I put the chain on, I flick the clutch on the derailleur there to the on position. You should always ride in the on position, and it's the off position for taking the wheel out and for removing the wheel and putting the chain on. A little bit of B-screw adjustment there because in the top ring it was the derailleur was running against the number 1 ring on the rear derailleur, so a little bit of B-screw adjustment, and again that will just make the world of difference to the bike. Moving on, check the brakes, make sure we don't need to adjust the position of the calipers, which in this case were okay, and then we move through the bike with a torque wrench. Now this is amazing the difference this can make. When I get to the saddle, you'll notice how much the torque wrench turns. It's because the saddle mount itself was not torqued to specification. On a long ride, that will only ever start to come loose, start to rattle, weight of a rider, vibration of the road, and eventually that saddle would have come loose. So this is why it's so important now. This one bolt was worth the entire service on this bike because it can make the world of difference to between servicing. So we've gone through everything on the bike. We're now happy everything's working. Even these bottle cages here we checked and they were all loose, so we just tighten those up. Lubricate the chain with a nice thin oil to really oil the rollers. That will make sure that them rollers are spinning nicely and the chain will just operate as it should with the gear shifting. Inflate the tyres. This was all about subtleties for this service. So yes, the rear wheel needed a bit of work on the bearings, but other than that the bike was in great condition but still required this service. The bike was good, but it's now just better. And everything's clean, everything's tidy, it's ready to go, ready to race, ready to ride. So thanks again for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, leave your comments, and we'll see you again next week. Bye for now.